Hamas terrorist. What is your definition of terror?
My definition of terror is the use of violence against civilians for political purposes. And by this definition, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but by the same token, Israel is practicing state terror because it is using violence on a massive scale against Palestinian civilians for political purposes. I don't hold a brief for Hamas. Hamas is not a paragon of virtue. Its leaders are not angels. They harm civilians indiscriminately. Killing civilians is wrong, period. That applies to Hamas, and it applies equally to the state of Israel. But there are 2 points I would like to make about Hamas. And that is, the first point is that it was elected in a fair and free election in January 2006. It was an impeccable election monitored by a number of international observers, including President Jimmy Carter. So it is not just a terrorist organization, it is a democratically elected government of the Palestinian people and the representative of the Palestinian people in Gaza as well as the West Bank. And the second point that I would like to make is that since coming to power, Gaza has moderated its political program. Its charter is extreme. Its charter denies the legitimacy of a Jewish state. Its charter calls for an Islamic state over the whole of historic Palestine. The charter has not been revised, but since coming to power, the leadership of Hamas has been much more pragmatic and stated that it is willing to negotiate a long-term ceasefire with the state of Israel for 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. Thirdly, Hamas joined with Fatah, the rival group, the mainstream group on the West Bank, in a national unity government in the summer of 2007. That national unity government lasted only 3 months. Israel, with American support, helped to sabotage and to bring down that national unity government. Israel refused to deal with a Palestinian government which included Hamas in it. And shamefully, both the United States and the European Union joined in Israel in this refusal to recognize a Hamas-dominated government. And Israel withdrew tax revenues, and European Union withdrew foreign aid in a shameful attempt to bring down a democratically elected government. So I do not defend Hamas, but I think that it hasn't received a fair hearing from the international community, and Israel has done everything to sabotage it all along.
Professor Shlaim, you say it's done everything to sabotage it, except at the beginning when you say it supported Hamas to weaken Fatah, which it now supports.
Indeed, Israel has always played the game of divide and rule. This is a very good tactic in times of war, to divide your enemies and pick them off one by one. No one can complain about that. But divide and rule isn't a good tactic in times of peace. If your aim is to achieve peace with the Arabs, then you should want unity among the Palestinians and unity in the Arab world. But Israel continued to play this game of divide and rule. Hamas emerged in the course of the first Intifada in the late 1980s 80s. It is the Islamic resistance movement. The mainstream movement, Fatah, was led by Yasser Arafat, and Israel gave tacit encouragement and support to the Islamic resistance in the hope of weakening the secular nationalists led by Yasser Arafat. It was a dangerous game to play because the end result of this game was that Hamas emerged as the strongest Palestinian political party. And Israel helped Hamas inadvertently in another way, because Fatah signed the Oslo Accord with Israel in 1993. It expected the Oslo Accord to lead to a two-state solution, and yet Israel, after the election of Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996, reneged on the Israeli side of the deal. So the Oslo Accord, the Oslo peace process, wasn't doomed to failure from the start. It failed because Israel, under the leadership of the Likud, reneged on its side of the deal. So that left the Palestinians with nothing but misery and poverty and frustration, and ever-growing Israeli settlements on the land. And it was this context that led to the success of Hamas at the last elections. So Israel has a lot to explain in the rise to power of the Hamas movement.
Professor Avi Shlaim, we only have a minute, but I want to ask you where you see the solution at this point. Barack Obama will be president on Tuesday in just a few days. Hillary Clinton will be Secretary of State.
The solution, this is a political conflict, and there is no military conflict there is no military solution to this conflict. The only solution lies in negotiations between Israel and Hamas about all the issues involved. President-elect Obama is a very impressive man, and a very intelligent man, and a very fair-minded man. He hasn't demonstrated any courage in the course of this crisis. He hasn't taken any position. He hasn't called for an immediate ceasefire. So the first step is an immediate ceasefire, and the next step would be negotiations between all the sides about restoring the ceasefire and then moving on to stage two, which is a political settlement to this tragic 100-year-old conflict.
And Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, who said in her confirmation hearing yesterday she would negotiate with Hamas.
Yes, but there are other signs from the Obama campaign that they would be willing to consider low-level indirect contacts with Hamas, and one has to be grateful for small mercies. So small, minor, low-level contacts with Hamas could lead to a proper dialogue in due course. So I remain optimistic that sanity and rationality would take over in American foreign policy after the dreadful last 8 years.
Professor Avi Shlaim, thank you very much for being with us. Professor Avi Shlaim, Professor of International Relations at Oxford University, served in the Israeli military. Among his books, Lion of Jordan, King Hussein's Life in War and Peace, known as one of the leading authorities in the world on the Israel-Palestine conflict and Arab-Israel conflict. Among his other books, The Iron Wall. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, we will speak with a doctor and a leading human rights campaigner talking about the weapons the Israeli military is using. Are they illegal? Stay with us.